After my wife died, the nights were the hardest, so I filled them by volunteering at the VA medical center. Every shift ended the same way. The same rideshare driver, the same quiet drive home, and the same cup of coffee I brought him black and hot as a small thank you. Then one night just before we reached my street, he didn't slow down. "Don't go home tonight," he said, his voice tight. "I'll explain in a minute." He drove past my house. What I saw next drained every drop of color from my face. "I appreciate you being here today. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I genuinely enjoy seeing how far these stories reach." A quick note before we begin: this story includes dramatized elements crafted for narrative impact. Any resemblance to actual people or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind it carries weight. Let's begin. If my Uber driver had turned onto Cedar Street that night, the way he always did, I would have stepped out of his car, walked up my driveway, unlocked my front door, and walked straight into something I would not have survived. My name is Calvin Mercer. I am 68 years old, and this is the story of how I almost died in the same house where I had built my entire life. It was a Tuesday night in late January. The kind of Southern California night that feels deceptively calm: cool air, quiet streets, the city lights glowing softly against a cloudless sky. I was sitting in the back seat of Darius Vaughn's navy blue Honda Accord, the heater humming gently against the chill. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the car, drifting from the thermos Darius kept wedged in his cup holder during his night shifts. We were driving west on Colorado Boulevard, retracing the same route we had followed dozens of times over the past few months. My volunteer shift at the VA Medical Center had ended at 10:30 as usual. Darius had been waiting at the curb right on time as usual. Routine has a way of making you feel invincible. Safe. I had come to rely on it. Outside the window, Pasadena slid by in familiar fragments. Storefronts I had known for decades. Intersections I could navigate blindfolded. Restaurants Margaret and I had once visited on slow Saturday afternoons. I saw the ice cream shop where we used to stop on summer evenings after dinner. I saw the corner where she once slipped her hand into mine and told me she was proud of the life we'd built. Everything looked exactly the same. And then Darius drove past Cedar Street. At first, I assumed he hadn't noticed. I leaned forward slightly. "Darius, you just missed the turn." No response. His hands were fixed on the steering wheel. Not loosely, not casually the way they usually were, but tight. His knuckles were pale under the dashboard light. His jaw was rigid. His eyes never left the road. Darius the First said again, louder. "That was my street." He inhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but too calm. "Mr. Mercer, I need you to stay calm, and I need you to trust me." A cold sensation spread through my stomach. I had known Darius for months. He was punctual to the minute, polite, thoughtful. He waited until I unlocked my front door before driving away. He never rushed, never missed a turn, never looked like this. "What's going on?" I asked. "I'll explain," he said quietly. "But not yet. Not until we're somewhere safe." Safe. The word hit me harder than it should have. Safe. It pulled something loose inside my chest. Something I had buried 8 months ago. Suddenly, I was no longer in the back seat of a Honda Accord. I was standing in the sterile hallway of Huntington Memorial Hospital in Glendale. The lights were too bright. The air smelled like disinfectant. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor. A doctor in green scrubs approached me. His expression was controlled, professional. "Too careful. Mr. Mercer," he said gently. "I'm very sorry. We did everything we could." I don't remember answering him. I don't remember if I nodded or if I just stared. I only remember the sound of my breathing too loud in the silence, and the strange sensation that the walls were tilting inward. Margaret was gone. The police had called 3 hours earlier. A semi-truck had rear-ended her car, on the 210 freeway near the La Cañada Flintridge exit. The driver had been texting. He hadn't seen her brake lights. He hadn't slowed down. Her car had spun across 2 lanes and slammed into the center divider. Catastrophic impact. They let me see her one last time. She was lying in a hospital bed, her face impossibly peaceful. Her hands were folded neatly across her chest. I sat beside her and took one of those hands in mine. It was still warm. 42 years, I whispered. We were supposed to have more time. We had met in 1982 at a recruitment fair at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She had been a graduate student in materials science. I had just finished my degree at Caltech. She asked me a question about thermal shielding systems. I gave an answer so awkward and incomplete that she laughed an unguarded, genuine laugh that hooked me immediately. We were married 6 months later. 42 years, 2 sons, a daughter, a craftsman house in Pasadena with a lemon tree in the backyard. Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles. Nights on the porch watching the stars and pretending we could name every constellation. And then in one violent moment on a freeway, all of it was reduced to silence. I buried her on a gray afternoon in February. The sky matched the mood, flat and heavy. Our sons flew in from Phoenix and Denver. Lillian stood beside me at the graveside, her hand resting on my shoulder. Tristan, her husband, stood a few steps away, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the ground. I remember thinking how quiet the world felt, how final. I remember thinking that losing Margaret was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I was wrong. Darius turned onto a side street I didn't recognize. Streetlights flickered across the windshield, casting shifting shadows across his face. My hands had begun to tremble. I pressed them flat against my knees to steady them. Darius the First said softly, "Please, tell me what's happening." He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, and I saw it. Fear. Real fear. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "there were 2 men standing outside your house tonight." My breath stalled in my throat. "They were waiting for you." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air, disconnected from reality. 2 men, waiting, for me, who I managed. Darius didn't answer immediately. He turned into the empty parking lot behind a Vaughn's grocery store and pulled into a dark corner. The engine idled softly. He shifted the car into park, then turned fully in his seat to face me. "I don't know who they are," he said, "but I know who sent them." The weight of that sentence landed like a physical blow. My mind scrambled for explanations. Mistaken identity. Wrong house. A coincidence. But something in Darius's expression told me this was not a misunderstanding. "Sent them," I repeated. He nodded once. I felt the world tilt again, but this time there were no hospital walls to steady me. I thought of my porch light, of the lemon tree in the yard, of Margaret's wind chimes hanging near the front door. I imagined myself stepping out of the car, walking up the driveway, fishing my keys from my pocket, and 2 men stepping out of the shadows. I swallowed hard. "Darius." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. "What are you saying?" He held my gaze. "I'm saying, if I had turned onto Cedar Street like I usually do, you would have walked straight into them." The heater hummed quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed on the main road. Everything else felt suspended. I had believed the worst pain of my life was already behind me. I had believed grief was the deepest darkness I would ever face. But sitting in that dim parking lot, staring at the man who had just refused to take me home, I realized something else entirely. Grief had broken my heart. This was different. This was someone planning to break my life. And in that moment, I understood that losing Margaret had not been the worst thing that could happen to me. Not even close. The house did not just feel quiet after Margaret died. It felt hollow. Every morning began the same way. Pale California sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin golden lines. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the kitchen. The old floorboards creaked under my weight as I made my way down the hallway. But there was no coffee brewing, no folded newspaper waiting on the table. No crossword puzzle half-finished in Margaret's neat handwriting. No soft humming drifting in from the backyard as she watered the lemon tree we had planted 20 years earlier. Just silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that presses against your ears until you realize it is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of someone. Margaret and I had lived in that house for nearly 3 decades. We bought it in the mid-90s, back when old Pasadena was still affordable, or at least affordable by Southern California standards. It was a craftsman bungalow with a wide porch that caught the afternoon light just right, a detached garage I had converted into a workshop, and a backyard shaded by a single jacaranda tree that bloomed purple every spring. The realtor had told us it was worth around $400,000 at the time. That felt like an enormous sum back then. Now, according to the latest county assessment, it was valued at just over $2.3 million. Margaret used to joke that we should sell it and buy a small cottage near the coast. Less to clean, she would say. More sunsets. We never did. Over the course of 32 years, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I had accumulated just over $600,000 in retirement savings. I had retired at 65, after spending most of my career designing thermal management systems for deep space missions. Systems that had to survive brutal temperature swings minus 100 degrees in the dark, blistering heat in direct solar exposure. It had been a good career. Stable, predictable, structured. My life had been structured until it wasn't. Now, sitting alone in that large house every evening, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The rooms were too big, the ceilings too high. The spaces between furniture seemed wider somehow. The house echoed. Lillian came the day after the funeral. She stood on the porch. Her dark hair pulled back her eyes, red from crying. She was 38, slender, composed in the careful way her mother had always been. When she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, her shoulders shook. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I held her tightly, but I said nothing. What words could possibly matter in a moment like that? Tristan had driven her. He remained outside near the car. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven. He leaned against the hood with his arms folded, staring at his phone as if checking stock prices. He did not come inside. He did not hug me. He did not say he was sorry. Lillian pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Dad, if you need anything at all, just call me. I'm here for you. I mean it." And I believed her. I truly did. She came by twice more in the following weeks. Each time she brought food, casseroles, soups, things that were easy to reheat. Most of it went untouched in the refrigerator. She asked gentle questions. "Are you sleeping? Are you eating enough? Do you need help with paperwork?" I told her I was fine. I told her I was managing. I was not fine. But I did not know how to say that without breaking. The nights were the worst. The house seemed to expand after sunset. The quiet became suffocating. I tried leaving the television on for background noise. I tried reading technical journals. I tried reorganizing the garage. Nothing worked. I started going to bed later, and later hoping exhaustion would overpower the memories before they had a chance to surface. It didn't. That was when I remembered Harold's advice. Harold was 82, a former Air Force cargo pilot who had flown missions in Vietnam. I met him at the VA Medical Center in downtown Los Angeles, where I had begun volunteering 3 nights a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, from 6 in the evening until 10:30. The center ran a technical training program for veterans transitioning into civilian careers. They needed someone who could teach basic engineering concepts, circuit design, troubleshooting systems, translating military technical skills into civilian language. I had never considered myself a teacher, but I needed somewhere to go. Harold had lost his wife 6 years earlier. He had the kind of face that looked permanently weathered by both sun and experience. White beard, sharp blue eyes. Every time he saw me sitting alone in the break room after a shift, staring into a paper cup of burnt coffee, he said the same thing. "Listen, kid," he would mutter, "you gotta keep moving. The second you stop, the pain catches up." "Trust me." I always nodded. I never told him the truth, that the pain had already caught up, that it had taken the passenger seat of my life and refused to leave. One Thursday night in late October, I almost caused a serious accident on the drive home. I had been staring at the road, but not seeing it. The white lines blurred together. My thoughts drifted somewhere between memory and regret. I did not notice the red light at Arroyo in California until I was already halfway through the intersection. A horn blared. Tires screeched. I jerked the wheel and slammed on the brakes. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might faint. I pulled over and sat there for 10 full minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The next morning, my older son called from Arizona. He worked in finance. We had not spoken much since the funeral. Conversations felt awkward now, like neither of us knew what role to play. He asked how I was doing. I told him about the near miss. "Dad," he said carefully, "maybe you should consider using a rideshare service at night. Just until things settle." I bristled at the suggestion. I had driven safely for 50 years. I had designed systems that traveled millions of miles through space. And now I needed someone to drive me home from work. But I knew he was right. So the following Tuesday, I downloaded the Uber app. I felt ridiculous. I spent 15 minutes entering my credit card information. I stared at the interface as if it were a foreign language. I had spent decades designing precision systems for NASA missions, and I struggled to request a car on my own phone. At 10:30 that night, after my shift ended, I stood outside the VA building and pressed the button. 5 minutes later, a navy blue Honda Accord pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window. "Mr. Mercer," he asked. He was a black man in his mid-40s with close-cropped hair and a calm, grounded presence. His voice was steady, controlled. I nodded and climbed into the back seat. The car was immaculate. Upholstery spotless. A faint lemon scent drifted from an air freshener hanging from the mirror. A small thermos sat in the cup holder. A folded jacket rested neatly on the passenger seat. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Darius. I'll get you home safe." Something about the way he said it felt intentional. Safe. I nodded, feeling awkward. I was not used to sitting in the back seat of someone else's car. Not used to being the passenger in my own life. Darius did not force conversation. He merged smoothly into traffic. His hands rested confidently on the wheel. He did not speed. He did not weave. He drove with deliberate care, like someone who understood that responsibility did not end with the steering wheel. When we pulled up to my house on Cedar Street, I instinctively reached for my wallet. Darius shook his head. "It's already charged to your card, Mr. Mercer. You're all set." I thanked him and stepped out. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed something. The headlights remained on. The engine continued idling. Darius didn't leave. He waited. He stayed parked at the curb until I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and turned on the porch light. Only then did his car pull away. At the time, I thought it was simple courtesy, professionalism, maybe standard practice. But looking back now, I understand something I didn't see then. That was the first sign, the first indication that Darius Vaughn paid attention to details other people ignored, that he noticed vulnerabilities, that he understood danger before it announced itself, and that long before I realized I needed protecting, he had already started watching. Over the next 3 weeks, Darius stopped being a rideshare driver in my phone app and became part of the architecture of my life. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, at precisely 10:30, I would step out of the VA medical center with my jacket buttoned against the cold, open the Uber app, and request a ride. And every single time, without fail, a navy blue Honda Accord would glide to the curb within minutes. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Pasadena wasn't a small town, but it wasn't Los Angeles either. Maybe he just worked the same hours. Maybe the algorithm favored consistency. But by the 5th or 6th ride, I began to notice the pattern felt too precise to be random. One Thursday evening, as I slid into the back seat, I decided to ask, "Do you work this area a lot?" I said, closing the door gently behind me. Darius caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Mostly nights, he replied. Downtown to Pasadena. That's my route. Quieter traffic. Fewer problems. Safer for folks heading home late. Makes sense, I said. He nodded once. After a while, you get to know the rhythm of the streets. Don't even need the GPS half the time. As if to demonstrate, he pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic without glancing at his phone. No robotic voice directing him. No hesitation. He turned onto Alameda with the ease of someone who had memorized the city by heart. There was something reassuring about that. By the second week, I stopped sitting in the back seat. It had begun to feel overly formal, like I was being chauffeured rather than transported. One evening, I opened the front passenger door instead. Darius didn't question it. He simply reached over, adjusted the seat back a few inches to give me more room, and said with a small grin, "Welcome aboard." From that point on, the rides felt less transactional and more conversational. We didn't dive into heavy subjects. Not at first. We talked about ordinary things. The unpredictable weather in Southern California. The Lakers' disappointing defense. The endless construction on the 110 freeway that seemed destined to outlive us both. Darius had a way of listening that felt intentional. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer unnecessary advice. He didn't pry. He would nod occasionally, add a brief comment, then let silence sit comfortably between us. One night, about halfway through November, he asked about my volunteer work. "You teach at the VA, right?" he said. "Technical stuff. Basic engineering," I answered. "Circuitry. Systems troubleshooting. A lot of the veterans already have hands-on experience. They just don't know how to translate it into civilian language. Certifications, resumes, interview answers." Darius considered that. "That's important work," he said. "A lot of vets don't get much support when they come back. They're expected to just adjust. Most of them do," I said. "But they shouldn't have to do it alone." He was quiet for a few seconds, eyes steady on the road. "My uncle was a Marine," he said finally. 2 tours in Iraq. When he came home, he couldn't hold a job. Not because he wasn't capable. He just couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit still. Too many people in one room would set him off. "I'm sorry," I said softly. Darius gave a slight shrug. He found carpentry. Works mostly by himself now. Says the quiet helps. I nodded. I understood more than I said. Grief and trauma do not always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they show up in restlessness, in insomnia, in the inability to sit still. By mid-November, the temperature at night had dropped just enough to bite. I began noticing that Darius kept his jacket zipped, even when the heater ran warm. The following Thursday, I stopped at the VA vending machine before leaving. The coffee was terrible thin, overbrewed, vaguely bitter, but it was hot. I bought 2 cups and carried them carefully outside. When the Accord pulled up, I opened the passenger door and held one out. "I thought you might want this," I said. "It's getting colder." Darius looked at the cup, as if I'd handed him something fragile. "You didn't have to do that, Mr. Mercer." "Call me Calvin," I replied. And yes, I did. "You've been reliable. That matters." He accepted it slowly, almost cautiously, and took a sip. A small smile crept across his face. Black. No sugar. "How'd you know?" I buckled my seatbelt. "I pay attention." He let out a quiet laugh, genuine, unforced, and placed the cup carefully in the holder. "Fair enough," he said. That night, something shifted. The conversation moved more easily, like a door that had finally opened. Darius told me about his daughter Keisha, 16 years old, a junior in high school, bright, focused, already thinking beyond her neighborhood. "She wants to study aerospace engineering," he said, pride woven into every syllable, "like you." I turned toward him, surprised. "Aerospace. Yeah. She's been obsessed with space since she was little. Used to drag me to Griffith Observatory every other weekend. She'd stand in front of those planetarium displays for hours, reading every plaque like it was scripture. I couldn't help but smile. That's a good obsession to have. She's taking AP calculus now, Darius continued. I try to help her with homework, but I'm out of my depth. If she ever wants to talk to someone who's been in the field, I said I'd be happy to answer questions. I spent 32 years at JPL. I still know people there. He glanced at me, something softer in his expression. That's kind of you, Calvin, really. It's nothing I said. Someone helped me when I was her age. We drove in silence for a few minutes after that not awkward silence, but shared quiet. The streetlights flickered across the windshield. The engine hummed steadily. Outside, Pasadena rolled by in dim storefronts and sleeping neighborhoods. For the first time since Margaret's death, the ride home did not feel like a descent into emptiness. It felt accompanied. Darius was not flashy. He was not dramatic. But he noticed things. The way I winced when the road was too bright. The way I hesitated before stepping out of the car. The way my shoulders tightened when we passed certain intersections. He always waited until I unlocked my door. Always. He never said he was watching out for me. He didn't need to. It showed in the details. In the way he adjusted the seat without being asked. In the way he chose smoother routes at night. In the way he kept his voice steady when conversation drifted too close to grief. Looking back now, I understand something I did not understand then. Those small gestures were not random acts of politeness. They were habits of awareness. And awareness, I would soon learn, is the difference between routine and survival. At the time, though, I simply thought I had found a dependable driver. I had no idea I had found something much more important. I had no idea how much those quiet rides, those small conversations about basketball and engineering, and a teenage girl dreaming about the stars would matter in the weeks ahead. And I certainly had no idea that the man who waited for my porch light to turn on would soon be the only reason I was still alive. The week after the coffee, Darius told me why he drove nights. It was a Thursday, and we were trapped on the 110 freeway beneath a sky the color of tarnished steel. A jackknifed semi near the Exposition Boulevard exit had swallowed 2 lanes, and traffic had hardened into something immovable. Red brake lights stretched ahead of us in an endless ribbon shimmering in the cold air. After 10 minutes of inching forward, Darius shifted the car into park and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the traffic, so I said, "Studying the unmoving sea of lights. Have you always been a driver?" Darius rested his hands loosely on the steering wheel. He didn't answer immediately. He stared through the windshield as if replaying a memory he wasn't sure he wanted to revisit. "No," he said finally. "I used to work for an insurance company, Liberty Mutual, claims investigator, fraud detection." I turned toward him. "Fraud detection." He nodded once. "Medical claims mostly. Car accidents. Workplace injuries. People exaggerate. Sometimes they fabricate entirely. My job was to figure out which stories held together and which didn't." "How long?" 12 years, he replied. "Started right after college. I was good at it. Not because I didn't trust people, because I noticed patterns, inconsistencies, the small details that change when someone tells the same story twice." There was no pride in his voice, just fact. "What made you leave?" Traffic nudged forward a few feet. Darius restarted the engine, but kept his foot on the brake. He took a slow breath before answering. 3 years ago, I got assigned to a case. A physician in Glendale. On paper, he was respected. Clean office, clean record. But his billing numbers didn't add up. He was charging Medicare for treatments that never happened. Physical therapy sessions, procedures, prescriptions, targeting who I asked quietly. Elderly patients, Darius said. People who didn't understand the paperwork. People who trusted their doctor. The word elderly hung between us like an accusation. "What did you do?" "What I was hired to do," he said. "I investigated. 6 months of digging. I found falsified records, forged signatures, payments funneled through shell companies. It was organized, intentional, and you reported it. I did. His jaw tightened. I submitted the case. Thought I'd done something worthwhile. And Darius gave a short, humorless breath. The doctor played golf with one of the vice presidents. 2 weeks later, I was in an HR meeting being told the evidence was inconclusive. They suggested I close the file, and you refused. He glanced at me, a flicker of something sharp in his eyes. I refused. What happened? I went above them, he said. Filed a complaint with the state insurance board. Thought someone higher up would care. Did they? Eventually, but not before the company fired me. For what? He looked back at the traffic. For not being a cultural fit. For not understanding team alignment. I shook my head slowly. That's legal, he finished. At-will employment. They didn't need to justify it. The freeway began to crawl again. Darius eased the car forward, merging carefully into the right lane. His driving remained steady, controlled, but I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. What about your family? I asked gently. He didn't hesitate this time. My wife couldn't handle the instability, he said. The lost income, the uncertainty, the legal costs. We argued constantly. 6 months after I lost the job, she filed for divorce. I'm sorry. She moved to San Diego, he continued. Left Keisha with me. He said it without bitterness, just fact. And Uber. I tried other things first, Darius said. Private investigations, contract security. Nothing steady. Uber gave me flexibility. I can get Keisha to school, pick her up, be home when she needs help with homework. Then I drive nights. He paused. I couldn't protect those patients 3 years ago, he said quietly. I won't make that mistake again. The words lingered in the car long after he said them. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was not just a confession. It was a promise. Around that same week, Lillian began appearing more often. It was subtle at first. Lillian had always been busy, her career, her marriage, her own schedule. After the funeral, her visits had been sporadic. But suddenly she was at my house 3 Sundays in a row. That hadn't happened since before she got married. She arrived with food, cleaned dishes I hadn't noticed piling up, straightened the throw pillows Margaret used to arrange just so. She moved through the house with an attentiveness that felt almost rehearsed. Dad, are you eating enough? She asked one afternoon, wiping down the kitchen counter. I'm fine, I told her. Are you sleeping? Mostly. Taking your vitamins? I smiled faintly. Yes, Mom. She didn't laugh. Instead, she crossed her arms and studied me. You look tired. I am tired, I said. That's different from being unwell. She nodded slowly. Then her voice shifted. Have you thought about updating your will? The question felt oddly sharp in the quiet kitchen. Not yet, I said. Why? Well, after Mom, things change. It's just good to have everything organized. Organized for what I asked. She offered a quick smile. Too quick. Just in case, Dad. Just in case of what? Her smile widened slightly, but her eyes didn't follow. You never know. The following Sunday, the questions continued. Who's listed as the beneficiary on your 401k? The tone was casual, almost careless. You are, I replied. You're my only daughter. She tilted her head slightly, processing that. And the house? What about it? Is it fully in your name? Yes. She nodded again. Tristan never came inside. He remained in the driveway engine, idling hands on the steering wheel, watching. At the time, I told myself Lillian was being responsible, protective, maybe even worried about me living alone. Grief makes you interpret concern as comfort, but there was something different in the rhythm of her questions. They weren't about my health. They weren't about my loneliness. They were about documentation, beneficiaries, ownership, access. She began asking if I needed help managing my accounts, if I wanted someone to sit with me while reviewing statements, if I had considered consolidating assets. Each question sounded reasonable on its own. Together they formed a pattern. I thought about Darius's words on the freeway. Inconsistencies, details that don't add up. I didn't see it then. I didn't want to. I saw a daughter stepping up. But warmth can be a mask. Concern can be strategy. And the more often Lillian visited, the more I began to sense that the conversations were not about love. They were about positioning, about proximity to something measurable. At the time, I dismissed the unease in my chest as grief. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the truth was simpler. The tone had shifted, and I didn't yet understand that the shift had nothing to do with my well-being. It had everything to do with my worth, not as a father, but as an asset. On the fourth Sunday, Lillian planted a seed that should have unsettled me more than it did. She was standing at my stove, stirring a pot of soup, as if she had always belonged there. The late afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, catching in her dark hair the same shade Margaret's had been when we were young. I sat at the table with the newspaper spread in front of me, pretending to read. It felt almost ordinary. Dangerous things often do. "Dad," she said casually without turning around, "you've been forgetting things lately." I lowered the paper. "Forgetting what?" She continued, stirring, methodical, controlled. "Last week you called me Jennifer." I frowned. "Jennifer, that's not my name," she said lightly. I blinked, searching my memory. "I did that." "You did," she replied, finally turning toward me. Her expression was carefully arranged, not accusatory, not alarmed. Concerned. Measured. "And you asked me about Mom's book club. What about it?" "Dad," she said gently, "Mom stopped going to book club 3 years ago." The words settled heavily between us. I tried to replay the conversation in my mind. Tried to picture myself saying Jennifer. Tried to hear myself asking about a book club that had dissolved long before Margaret died. "I don't remember that," I admitted. "I know," Lillian said softly. "That's what worries me." Something flickered inside me, small, sharp, uncomfortable. Not fear exactly. Doubt. I folded the newspaper slowly. I might have been distracted. Grief does strange things. Maybe she ag Vaughn, but it's happening more often. More often. She crossed her arms, not defensive, not aggressive. Protective. "Have you considered seeing a doctor?" For what I asked. Memory issues. "Dad, at your age, those things can escalate quickly." "I'm 68, I said, trying to keep irritation out of my voice. "Not 90. I know," she said quickly. "But early signs can start subtle. Mom would want me to make sure you're okay." The mention of Margaret disarmed me. I looked down at the table. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. "I'll schedule an appointment." Lillian's smile returned. But it felt fragile, brittle around the edges. "Good," she said. "I just want you safe." After she left, the house felt even quieter than usual. I sat at the kitchen table long after the soup had cooled. I tried to reconstruct the moment she described. Tried to remember the slip of the tongue. Tried to decide whether it had actually happened, or whether grief had blurred something in my mind. The harder I tried to recall it, the less certain I became. Doubt is powerful when planted carefully. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that while Lillian was introducing uncertainty into my home, something else was unfolding across the city. 2 nights later, just after 11:15 on a Tuesday, Darius had dropped me off on Cedar Street and was driving back toward downtown Los Angeles when his phone chimed with a new ride request. "Pick up the Edison, Spring Street." He accepted. The Edison was a dimly lit underground bar, dressed up like a speakeasy exposed brick vintage lighting businessman, unwinding too loudly. Darius pulled to the curb and waited. A few minutes later, a man staggered out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit that had lost its discipline. Tie loosened, collar open. His movements had the loose sway of someone deep into a bottle of whiskey. Darius unlocked the doors. The man climbed into the back seat without greeting him. "Glendale," he muttered. "I'll put the address in." Darius nodded and eased into traffic. He had transported enough intoxicated passengers to recognize the spectrum: sleepy, chatty, combative. This one radiated something sharper. Anger. "God damn old man," the passenger muttered barely above a whisper. Sitting on all that money. Darius kept his gaze fixed forward. No reaction. The man's phone lit up. He dialed without hesitation and didn't bother lowering his voice. "Yeah," he said louder now. "I'm handling it." Darius's fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. "She's got him wrapped around her finger," the man continued. "Just need a few more weeks." The words hung in the air. Darius glanced briefly at the rearview mirror. The man's jaw was clenched, eyes unfocused. "The house alone is worth over $2 million, the man said. "Pasadena. Plus the retirement accounts. We're talking $3 million easy." "Pasadena, old man, $3 million. A cold sensation slid down Darius's spine. He remained silent, calm, invisible. "Just get the paperwork signed." The passenger continued. "Once he's declared incompetent, we move him into a facility. Sell the house. Liquidate the accounts. Done. Declared incompetent." Darius's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. He turned onto the 134 freeway mind-assembling fragments, the way he had been trained to do years earlier. Insurance fraud had taught him to listen for structure, intention, planning. This was not drunken rambling. This was logistics. The man ended the call and tossed his phone onto the seat beside him. For a moment, there was only the sound of tires on pavement. Darius drove without speaking. He knew enough about human behavior to understand the difference between fantasy and execution. The language this man used, paperwork incompetent facility liquidate, was procedural, calculated. When they arrived in Glendale near a modern condo complex off Brand Boulevard, the passenger climbed out without acknowledgement. No tip, no thanks, just a slammed door. Darius sat there for several seconds after the man disappeared into the building. "Pasadena. Old man. $3 million. He replayed the conversation in his mind, cataloging the details. "She's got him wrapped around her finger. Just need a few more weeks. Declared incompetent." Darius didn't know who the old man was, but he knew something else. He had once failed to protect elderly victims when corporate politics silenced him. He would not fail again. At that moment, the pieces were still scattered, disconnected. A grieving father in Pasadena, a daughter asking about wills, a drunk man discussing incompetency paperwork. Darius didn't yet know how those threads would converge. He only knew he had just overheard the first outline of something dangerous. And somewhere in that outline, though he did not yet see it, clearly was me. 5 days later, something happened that I knew nothing about. At the time, I was sitting at my kitchen table arguing silently with my own memory, wondering whether I had truly called my daughter by the wrong name. I did not know that across the city a different argument was taking place. One that would determine whether I lived long enough to question anything again. Darius told me this part months later when the dust had settled and the danger had passed. I am telling it to you now, so you understand how thin the line was between my ordinary life and something far darker. It was a Tuesday night. 5 days after Darius had driven the drunk man from the Edison to Glendale. He was parked near the VA Medical Center at 10:45, engine idling, waiting for the next ride request to come through. The November air had turned sharp, the kind that settles into your bones if you sit too long without moving. Then his phone chimed. He glanced down at the screen. Passenger name Tristan M. Darius froze. Tristan, the same man who had slurred through a phone call about an old man in Pasadena, about a house worth over $2 million, about incompetency and liquidation. Darius watched the screen for several seconds, as if expecting the name to change. It didn't. He accepted the ride. The pickup location was the Golden Gopher on South Main Street, a narrow bar tucked between brick buildings, dim and heavy with the smell of old wood and spilled beer. Darius pulled up at 10:50 p.m. and waited. A few minutes later, Tristan emerged. He looked worse than the first night. His tie hung crooked. His shirt was untucked. His movements were looser, less controlled. He swayed slightly as he approached the car. Darius unlocked the doors. Tristan dropped into the back seat with a dull thud slumping against the window. "Glendale," he muttered. "Same place." Darius nodded and pulled away from the curb. He said nothing. He drove the way he always did, steady, neutral, forgettable. The kind of driver you stop noticing after 30 seconds. For the first few minutes, Tristan was silent. Then his phone rang. He answered without hesitation. "Yeah," he said loudly. "I'm on my way." Darius kept his gaze fixed forward. The rearview mirror offered a narrow slice of the back seat, Tristan's jaw-tight eyes unfocused but intent. The Dr. Ag Von Tristan continued. "Dr. Lawson, 10,000. He'll sign the paperwork." Darius felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "He says early onset cognitive decline," Tristan went on. "That's all we need." The words clicked into place. "Doctor, paperwork, diagnosis. After that, we get power of attorney," Tristan said. "Move him into a facility. Sell the house." Easy. Power of attorney. Facility. Sell the house. This was no longer drunken fantasy. This was execution. Darius's hands remained steady on the wheel. His breathing stayed slow. Years of investigative training had taught him how to listen without reacting. "Lillian's getting soft," Tristan said. "Says he's not that bad yet." "Not that bad yet." "But we don't have time," Tristan snapped. "Between the two of us, we're 400 grand in the hole. They're coming." $400,000. There it was. The motive. "The old man volunteers downtown," Tristan added. "Stress is the perfect angle. We'll say it's too much for him." Downtown. The VA Medical Center. Darius's thoughts sharpened instantly. He drove that route 3 nights a week. He picked up one elderly volunteer every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Tristan leaned his head back, eyes drifting closed. "Pasadena," he muttered. "Cedar Street." Darius's foot almost slammed the brake pedal. Cedar Street. Calvin Mercer. The porch light. The lemon tree. The man who brought him coffee. Darius forced his body to remain still. Forced his mind to slow down. Old man. Pasadena. Cedar Street. Volunteers downtown. Daughter named Lillian. The puzzle assembled itself with terrifying clarity. The target wasn't hypothetical. It wasn't abstract. It was me. Darius drove the rest of the trip in silence. When they reached the same condo complex near Brand Boulevard, Tristan stumbled out without acknowledgement. No thank you, no tip, no backward glance, just the slam of a door. Darius remained parked in the driveway long after Tristan disappeared inside. His heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his throat. He replayed every word in his head. "Dr. Lawson, $10,000. Early onset cognitive decline. Power of attorney. Facility. Liquidate assets. 400,000 in debt. Cedar Street." He had once listened to elderly patients describe medical procedures that had never happened, fraud disguised as care. He had once tried to stop a physician who falsified records. He had once lost his job for refusing to look away. He wasn't going to look away now. Darius pulled out of the complex and drove home. It was nearly 1:30 in the morning when he stepped into his kitchen. The house was quiet. Keisha was asleep upstairs. The refrigerator hummed softly in the dark. He sat at the table and pulled out his phone. Notes app. He began typing. Date Tuesday, November 14th, time. 10:50 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Passenger Tristan M. Repeat from November 9th. Key statements. Old man Pasadena, Cedar Street. Dr. Lawson, $10,000. Dementia diagnosis. Power of attorney facility placement. Sell house $2 million plus retirement accounts $400,000 debt. Daughter Lillian. He stared at the list. Then he opened a browser and typed, Elder Financial Abuse Power of Attorney California. The screen filled with articles. Conservatorship fraud, medical collusion, families draining bank accounts, legal exploitation disguised as protection. It was not rare. It was not dramatic. It was procedural. Darius leaned back in his chair. 3 years earlier, he had uncovered a physician who billed Medicare for treatments that never occurred. He had built the case carefully, documented everything, reported it, and he had been silenced, fired, discredited. The elderly patients in that case had remained vulnerable longer than they should have. He had carried that failure like a weight. Now, sitting alone at his kitchen table at 1:30 in the morning, Darius realized something. He had been placed back in the exact same position. An elderly man, a corrupt doctor, paperwork designed to strip autonomy. Except this time the elderly man had a name, Calvin Mercer. Darius picked up his phone again and added one final line. Calvin Mercer, 68, Pasadena, target plan, fake dementia diagnosis, obtain POA, institutionalize, liquidate assets, need proof. He set the phone down. The house was silent, but his mind was not. He understood something critical. Overheard conversations were not enough. Suspicion was not enough. Even a detailed note was not enough. If he approached me without evidence, I might dismiss him. If he went to police without documentation, they might dismiss him. If he confronted Tristan prematurely, the plan could accelerate. He needed something undeniable. Recorded proof, financial records, confirmation of the doctor's involvement. Something that could not be waved away as misunderstanding. Darius sat in the dark kitchen for a long time that night. He had already made the decision. He would not ignore this. He would not let another elderly person become paperwork. But before he said a single word to me, he would build the case, and this time no one would be able to bury it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Darius was about to cross a line that frightened even him. Technically, what he chose to do lived in a gray area, maybe darker than gray. He told me this months later after everything had unraveled, and the truth was no longer dangerous to speak aloud. At the time, I was moving through my routine teaching at the VA, second-guessing my memory, replaying Lillian's careful concern in my head, and wondering if I really was slipping. I had no idea that Darius was preparing for something. The morning after he documented Tristan's call in his notes app, Darius drove to a Best Buy on South Lake Avenue in Pasadena. He walked past rows of televisions and laptops to the automotive electronics aisle and stood there longer than he meant to. Dash cameras lined the shelf, sleek packaging, promising security protection, peace of mind. He chose one with built-in audio recording. $139.99 before tax. Money he didn't truly have to spare, but money he felt he couldn't afford not to spend. He paid in cash. That afternoon, he installed it himself. The camera sat just below his rearview mirror, small and discreet, a blinking red light, the only indication it was active. Most passengers wouldn't notice it, and if they did, they would assume it was standard safety equipment for a rideshare driver. Because it was, at least partially. Darius didn't stop there. He opened Uber's terms of service and read the recording policy twice. Drivers may record rides for safety purposes by using the service passenger's consent to recording. The wording wasn't ironclad. It wasn't a formal legal shield, but it was enough ambiguity to let him sleep at night. Barely. As an added precaution, he opened the voice memos app on his iPhone and placed the phone inside the pocket, behind the passenger seat. Backup audio. Redundancy. Old habits from his investigative days. He knew the risks. If Tristan discovered the recording, Darius could be sued. Reported. Deactivated. He could lose his account, his primary source of income. But he also remembered something else. An elderly man who brought him coffee. An elderly man who treated him like a colleague instead of hired help. An elderly man who offered to mentor his daughter without hesitation. Darius had once failed to protect elderly patients because corporate politics shut him down. He would not fail again. 3 nights later, Friday, November 17th at 11:40 p.m., his phone chimed. Passenger Tristan M. Darius felt his pulse jump. He glanced at the dash camera. The red light blinked steadily. He checked the phone tucked behind the seat. Voice memos was recording. He accepted the ride. Pickup Commerce Casino. The casino's lights glared against the dark sky, artificial brightness, masking late-night desperation. Darius pulled into the valet lane and waited. A few minutes later, Tristan emerged. He looked worse than either previous encounter. Shirt untucked, tie gone, collar stained, face flushed and damp with sweat. The scent of whiskey reached the front seat before the door fully closed. He dropped into the back seat. "Glendale," he slurred. Darius nodded and pulled away. No greeting, no small talk. For several minutes, the only sound was the hum of tires against asphalt. Then Tristan's phone rang. He answered immediately. "Yeah," he said loudly. "I hired them." Darius's grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Two guys," Tristan continued. "They know what to do." Darius kept his breathing steady. "If the old man signs the paperwork, great," Tristan said. "If he doesn't, they'll persuade him." The word hung in the air. Persuade. Darius heard a faint voice on the other end of the call. How hard it asked. Tristan laughed. "Whatever it takes," he said. "Just don't leave marks. Make it look like he fell or something." Darius felt his knuckles turn white. "Don't leave marks. Make it look like he fell. Lillian doesn't know about this part." Tristan continued, voice thick with alcohol. "She thinks we're just moving him into a facility. Clean and simple. But I'm not gambling $3 million on a signature. $3 million. My life reduced to a number." "The old man lives alone," Tristan added. "Big house, easy." Darius's stomach dropped. Easy. He had seen how I unlocked my door slowly at night. How I sometimes paused before stepping onto the porch. How grief had softened my awareness. "Next week," Tristan's voice sharpened. "After he gets home from volunteering, he'll be tired. Guard down. Next week. 7 days, maybe fewer." Tristan ended the call and tossed his phone beside him. He leaned back, eyes drifting shut, as if he had just finished discussing weekend plans. Darius drove without speaking. Every instinct screamed at him to react, to confront, to demand. He did none of it. He focused on the road. When they reached the Glendale condo complex, Tristan stepped out without acknowledgement. No tip, no thank you, just the hollow thud of the door slamming shut. Darius remained in the driveway long after Tristan disappeared inside. The engine idled softly. He reached back and stopped the voice memo's recording. 25 minutes. 25 uninterrupted minutes of Tristan's voice. Clear, coherent. Planning, hiring, persuasion without marks. Make it look like he fell. Darius replayed the last few seconds. Whatever it takes. His hands were shaking. This was no longer about forged documents or medical fraud. This was escalation. This was violence disguised as accident. He thought about the physician in Glendale years ago. The elderly patients whose charts had been manipulated, whose trust had been exploited. He had tried to protect them and been silenced. Now he had something different. Evidence, audio, proof of intent. But proof alone wasn't enough yet. He couldn't simply hand over a recording without corroboration. He needed context, timeline, pattern. He needed to protect me without tipping off Tristan. Because if Tristan suspected exposure, the plan could accelerate. Darius finally shifted the car into drive. As he pulled away from the condo complex, his mind worked through options. Police, adult protective services, direct confrontation. But none of those steps could happen without preparation. He drove home in silence. When he walked into his kitchen, it was nearly 1:30 in the morning. The house was dark. Keisha asleep upstairs. The refrigerator humming like it always did. He sat at the table and replayed the recording once more. There was no ambiguity, no misinterpretation. Tristan had hired 2 men. Tristan intended to stage an accident. Tristan intended to make sure the old man in Pasadena me would not be an obstacle. Darius leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had 25 minutes of audio. 25 minutes that transformed suspicion into certainty. Financial exploitation had become something else entirely. Something physical. Something final. And somewhere in the middle of Pasadena, an elderly man with a lemon tree in his backyard was sitting at his kitchen table worried about memory lapses, unaware that a countdown had begun. That week, I began to notice something different about Darius. He was still punctual, still steady behind the wheel, still polite in the quiet, deliberate way that had become familiar to me. But there was tension in him now. a tightness around his eyes, a pause before he answered simple questions, a silence that felt heavier than before. At the time, I assumed he was tired, overworked, maybe worried about his daughter's college applications. I had no idea that he was wrestling with a decision that could cost him everything. Months later, after the arrests, after the courtroom, after the truth had torn through my life like a storm, Darius told me about that Saturday night. It was 2 in the morning. He had just dropped Tristan off in Glendale again. The recording sat on his phone, 25 minutes of it. Clear, detailed, cold. Evidence that someone intended to hurt an elderly man in Pasadena. Evidence that someone intended to hurt me. Darius walked into his house quietly, so he wouldn't wake Keisha. The kitchen was dark, except for the faint glow of the microwave clock. He sat at the table, elbows resting on the wood phone in his hands. He replayed the audio, Tristan's voice. Make it look like he fell. Whatever it takes. Next week. Darius stared at the ceiling. What was he supposed to do with this? If he went to the police, they would ask how he obtained the recording. He would have to admit he was capturing audio in his vehicle. Even if Uber's policy allowed recordings for safety purposes, it wasn't airtight. Not in California. Not without explicit consent. He could lose his Uber account. He could be sued. He could be accused of violating privacy laws. And even if law enforcement listened, if they took it seriously, there was another question looming. Would I believe him? Would a 68-year-old father trust a rideshare driver he had known for a few weeks over his own daughter? Darius sat in the dark, hands pressed to his temples. 3 years earlier, he had taken a stand against fraud. He had been right. And it had cost him his job, his reputation, eventually his marriage. Now he was being asked by circumstance, by conscience, to risk again. For a man who had simply offered him coffee. For a man who had offered to mentor his daughter. For a man he barely knew. He reached for his phone, intending to turn it off and go upstairs. To postpone the decision. Then he heard footsteps. Keisha stood in the doorway, in an oversized Caltech sweatshirt, holding a glass of water. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun. She squinted against the kitchen light. "Dad," she asked softly. "You okay?" Darius forced a small smile. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." Keisha walked over and sat across from him. She had always been perceptive. She could read him the way he read case files. "What's wrong?" she asked. He hesitated. What if he said slowly, "Someone you care about is in danger from their own family, and they don't know it." Keisha frowned. "Then you tell them." "What if they don't believe you?" "Then you show them proof," she said immediately. "That's what you do. That's what you've always done." Darius was quiet. Keisha leaned forward. "Dad, you've told me my whole life that the worst thing someone can do is see something wrong and pretend they didn't. You said that about your old job. You said it about the doctor." She paused. "Don't start pretending now." Something shifted in him. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. She gave him a sleepy smile. "Go to bed. You'll figure it out." And in that moment, sitting in the quiet kitchen with his daughter, Darius made his decision. He would act, even if I doubted him, even if it cost him. The following Tuesday night, I climbed into his car, carrying 2 cups of vending machine coffee as usual. I handed him one. He accepted it, but didn't drink. He just held the cup between his palms, staring through the windshield as if rehearsing something. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" I looked at him, surprised by the tone. "Of course. Your daughter, Lillian. Do you see her often?" I smiled faintly. "More than I used to. She's been wonderful since Margaret passed. Visits almost every week." Darius nodded slowly. "Has she been asking about your finances?" he asked. "Your accounts. Estate planning." I blinked. "Yes, actually. She's just being responsible, making sure everything's in order." "That's normal, isn't it?" Darius was silent for a few seconds. "In my old job," he said carefully, I saw a lot of situations where concern wasn't always what it looked like. Sometimes people who seem helpful have other motives. I felt a prickle of irritation. Darius the First said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Lillian is my daughter." "I know," he replied softly. "I'm just saying be careful. Make sure you're trusting the right people." I let out a small laugh. It sounded thinner than I intended. Of course I trust her. Darius didn't argue. He simply nodded and put the car in drive. We rode in silence. When we reached Cedar Street, he turned toward me one last time. "If anything ever feels wrong," he said quietly, "anything at all, call me. Please." His seriousness unsettled me. "Okay," I said confused. "I will." I watched his taillights disappear and stood for a moment on my driveway, wondering what had just happened. 2 days later, on Thursday afternoon, Lillian arrived with Chinese takeout. Orange chicken, fried rice, egg rolls. We ate in the kitchen, laughing lightly about something trivial. For a few minutes, it felt like before, like when she was younger, when Margaret was still here. After we finished, Lillian set down her fork. "Dad," she said gently, "I made you a doctor's appointment." My stomach tightened. "What?" "You said you'd go," she reminded me. "To get your memory checked." "I did. Yes." Her voice was calm, patient. "And this week you called me twice to ask the same question. About your accountant." I felt my pulse in my throat. "I don't remember that. You also forgot we had lunch plans on Tuesday." Lunch plans. I searched my mind and found nothing. "Did I really forget?" I whispered. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Dad." She reached into her purse and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. She placed it in front of me. "Dr. Richard Lawson," she said, "geriatric specialist. Monday at 2. I'll drive you." My eyes fixed on the name. "Dr. Lawson," an address in Glendale. The letters blurred slightly. "Mom would want you to take care of yourself," Lillian whispered. I reached for her hand. "Okay," I said, "I'll go." She smiled through tears. "Thank you. I love you." "I love you too." After she left, I remained at the table staring at the appointment slip. I felt grateful, relieved, comforted that my daughter cared enough to arrange this. I did not know that Darius had just warned me. I did not know that Dr. Lawson's name was already written in Darius's notes. And I did not know that the appointment sitting on my kitchen table was not an act of care. It was the first step in a carefully constructed trap. And I had just Ag Vaughn to walk into it. That Friday night, Tristan got into Darius's car one more time. And this time he laid out the schedule. I didn't learn any of this until months later. That night I was at home on Cedar Street, sitting in my recliner with the television on, low, half watching a documentary and half lost in my own thoughts. I had no idea that less than a mile away, my future was being reduced to bullet points and deadlines. Darius, meanwhile, was doing something far more dangerous than driving. He was collecting evidence that would keep me alive. It was 11:20 p.m. when his phone buzzed with a new request. Passenger Tristan M. Pickup, East Colorado Boulevard. Darius felt his stomach drop. East Colorado was too close. Less than 10 blocks from my house. He accepted the ride anyway. As he drove toward the bar, he checked everything automatically, dash camera blinking red. Voice memos recording. Phone battery charged. Memory space available. Prepared. Tristan walked out a few minutes later. He wasn't drunk this time. That was what unsettled Darius most. Tristan's tie was straight, his shirt tucked in, his steps steady, his eyes sharp and alert. There was no sway in his gait, no slur in his voice. Sober, calculated. He slid into the back seat and gave an address in Glendale. Darius nodded and merged into traffic. For the first few minutes, Tristan said nothing. Then his phone rang. "Yeah," Tristan answered. "Let me confirm the timeline." Darius's pulse quickened, but his posture remained relaxed. "The doctor sees him Monday." Tristan continued. "Dr. Lawson signs off on cognitive decline. That gives us the paperwork." Darius felt a cold line of clarity run through him. "Monday. By Wednesday, Tristan said we'll have power of attorney. Power of attorney by Wednesday. Darius kept his breathing even. Wednesday night, Tristan went on after he gets home from volunteering. Around 10:30–11. Darius's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. He'll be alone, Tristan said. You go in. Get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses, there was a pause. We know what to do, a voice responded faintly on the other end. Tristan's tone hardened. Make it clean, heart attack, fall, whatever works. Just make it look natural. Darius's knuckles went white. Not intimidation, not coercion, elimination. Lillian still thinks we're moving him into assisted living, Tristan added. She doesn't know about this part, and she's not going to. So even she was compartmentalized. Wednesday night, Tristan repeated. After 10:30. He gets home around 11. Plenty of time. The voice on the phone said something Darius couldn't fully hear. Tristan laughed. No cameras, no alarm. Big house. Easy target. Easy target. Darius turned onto the 134 freeway, mind racing. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Tristan stared out the window, expression blank as if discussing plumbing repairs. When they arrived in Glendale, Darius paid attention. He memorized the condo number, the building layout, the street signs. Tristan stepped out and walked up the stairs without looking back. Darius stayed parked for several seconds. He checked the time. 11:58 p.m. He replayed the conversation in his head. Monday, doctor. Wednesday, power of attorney. Wednesday night entry. Make it look natural. He opened his calendar app. Today was Friday. That meant 3 days until the medical appointment. 5 days until Wednesday. 6 days until the night they planned to enter my house. 6 days until 2 men would walk through my front door. Not to scare me. Not to threaten me. To ensure I didn't wake up. Darius drove home in silence. It was after midnight when he pulled into his driveway. The house was dark. Keisha asleep upstairs. He went straight to the kitchen and sat at the table. 4 recordings now. 4. He opened his phone and began listening. Ride 1, November 9th, old man. Pasadena, 3 million. Facility, power of attorney. Ride 2. November 14th, Dr. Lawson, 10,000. Dementia diagnosis, Cedar Street. Lillian, 400,000 debt. Ride 3, November 17th. Hired 2 guys. Persuade him. Make it look like he fell. Ride 4. November 24th, Monday, doctor. Wednesday, POA. Wednesday night entry. Make it look natural. The progression was unmistakable. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was a timeline. Darius backed up the files immediately. First to iCloud, then to Google Drive. Redundancy. Then he composed an email to himself. Subject evidence, Calvin Mercer case. Open if something happens to me. He attached all 4 recordings, screenshots of his notes, dates, times, locations. He hit send. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He had done this before documented fraud assembled cases. But this was different. This time, someone could die before paperwork caught up. The next morning, Keisha found him still sitting there. He hadn't gone to bed. Dad, she said softly, stepping into the kitchen. You look terrible. He looked up slowly. I might lose my job over this, he said. Maybe more. Keisha sat down across from him. Is it the right thing? He nodded. Yes. Then do it. Simple. Clear. Darius reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The decision crystallized. Tuesday night, when he picked me up from the VA, he would tell me everything. He would play the recordings, show me the notes, explain the timeline, convince me that my daughter and her husband were planning not just to take my house, but to remove me from the equation entirely. And if I refused to believe him, if I defended Lillian, if I dismissed him, he would go to the police anyway, because by Wednesday night 2 men would be waiting for me. Darius didn't know yet whether I would trust him. He didn't know whether law enforcement would move fast enough. He only knew one thing. The clock was running, and by Tuesday it might already be almost too late. Monday afternoon, Lillian drove me to see Dr. Lawson. I believed it was a precaution, a formality, a daughter being responsible. It was neither. We pulled into the parking structure of a sleek medical office building on South Lake Avenue at exactly 2 o'clock. The place looked immaculate, glass facade, polished concrete, tasteful landscaping. The kind of building designed to reassure you before you ever meet the doctor. Lillian parked carefully and turned off the engine. "You ready?" she asked gently. I forced a small smile, as I'll ever be. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and expensive coffee. The floors gleamed. A large, abstract painting hung behind the reception desk. Everything about the place suggested competence, stability, authority. Lillian checked me in while I stood beside her like a schoolboy waiting outside the principal's office. We sat in the waiting area together. She flipped through a lifestyle magazine without really reading it. I stared at a muted television mounted in the corner. A health segment played silently, captions crawling across the bottom of the screen. Neither of us spoke much. When the nurse called my name, Lillian squeezed my hand. "I'll be right here, Dad," she said softly. "You've got this." I nodded and followed the nurse down a long, carpeted hallway. Dr. Richard Lawson's office looked exactly as you would expect a geriatric specialist's office to look. Diplomas framed in dark wood covered one wall, medical school board certifications, affiliations with prestigious organizations. There was even a photograph of him shaking hands with a public official, both smiling confidently at the camera. The room was curated to inspire trust. Dr. Lawson stood as I entered. He was in his early 60s, silver hair, neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His handshake was firm, his smile warm but measured. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "thank you for coming in. Your daughter is very concerned about you." I gave a small shrug. "She worries." He smiled politely. "That's what daughters do." He began with simple questions. "What year is it?" "And who is the president?" I paused briefly. "Donald Trump. Just began his second term." "Good," he said, making a note. "I'm going to say 3 words," he continued. "Repeat them back to me and I'll ask you to recall them later. Apple, table, penny. Apple, table, penny. Excellent." He handed me a blank sheet of paper and a pen. "Please draw a clock. Put in the numbers and set the hands to 10 past 11. I drew it carefully. Numbers spaced evenly. Mine at hand on the 2. Our hand slightly past 11. It looked correct. Dr. Lawson glanced at it, nodded faintly, and set it aside without comment. Next came a list of 5 words to memorize. Then he asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s. 100, I began. 93, 86, 79, 72. I continued steadily until he interrupted me around 30-something. "Very good," he said. He asked for the 5 words again. I recalled 4, and the 3 words from earlier he prompted. Apple, table, penny. He wrote something down. He wrote for longer than seemed necessary. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted, subtle concern etched between his brows. "Mr. Mercer," he said slowly, "I'm concerned." The word unsettled me. Concerned about what I asked. I answered everything. "Cognitive decline often begins subtly," he replied. "It's not always about incorrect answers. It's about patterns, hesitation, processing time." "I didn't hesitate," I said, frowning. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Based on today's evaluation, I'm seeing early indicators of cognitive impairment." The room felt smaller. "Impairment," I repeated. "Yes," he said calmly. "Early stage cognitive decline. Likely progressive." My pulse began to pound in my ears. "No," I said. "That's not right. I feel fine." He reached for his prescription pad. "Early intervention is critical," he said. "I'm prescribing donepezil. It may help slow progression." "Donepezil," I stared at him. "That's for dementia. It's commonly used in early-stage cases. I don't have dementia." He did not argue. He simply pressed a button on his desk phone. "Could you send Lillian in, please?" A moment later, she appeared in the doorway. Dr. Lawson turned toward her, shifting his body slightly so that I felt peripheral. "Your father is showing signs of early cognitive decline," he said gently. It's not severe yet, but it will require supervision. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Dad. I stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I answered everything. Denial is common, Dr. Lawson said calmly, addressing Lillian rather than me. Patients often lack insight into their deficits. Deficits. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. Dad, why didn't you tell me it was this bad? It's not bad, I insisted. I'm fine. Dr. Lawson continued in the same composed tone. I recommend you begin considering assisted living arrangements within the next few months. For his safety. Safety. As if I were a hazard to myself. Lillian nodded through tears. We'll do whatever we need to. I felt invisible. I don't need assisted living, I said, my voice rising. This is absurd. Dr. Lawson handed me the prescription. 1 tablet daily. Follow up in 4 weeks. He spoke with finality as though the matter were settled. The nurse opened the door. Lillian placed a hand on my arm, guiding me out gently, as if I might wander otherwise. We walked back through the hallway in silence. In the car, she drove without turning on the radio. When we reached my house, she parked and turned toward me. I love you, Dad, she said, tears still lingering in her eyes. We're going to handle this together. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. Inside my living room after she left, I sat alone. The prescription slip trembled slightly in my hand. Donepezil, for dementia. I replayed the appointment in my head. The questions, the clock drawing, the counting backward. 4 out of 5 words, 3 out of 3. Everything felt normal. Yet I had walked out with a diagnosis. Cognitive decline, assisted living, supervision, a quiet dismantling of independence. I told myself perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps I truly had hesitated. Perhaps I hadn't noticed. That seed of doubt, small but invasive, began to take root. Maybe I had called Lillian twice. Maybe I had forgotten lunch plans. Maybe. I stared at the neat black letters on the prescription again. Dr. Richard Lawson, an address in Glendale. I did not know that his name had already appeared in someone else's notes. I did not know that money had changed hands. I did not know that the diagnosis was not medical. It was strategic. I walked into that office, a grieving widower with a healthy mind. I walked out labeled incompetent. And somewhere beyond my awareness, paperwork was already moving forward. I thought my daughter was protecting me. I did not know I had just stepped onto the first rung of a ladder designed to remove me from my own life. Tuesday night, I got into Darius's car carrying more weight than a thermos of coffee. It was 10:45 p.m. The Via Medical Center parking lot was nearly empty, the last few cars scattered under tall streetlights that stretched our shadows long and thin across the pavement. The air was cool, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. I opened the passenger door and slid into the seat, closing it gently behind me. For the first time since I'd started riding with him, I forgot to hand Darius his cup of coffee. He noticed immediately. Mr. Mercer, he said softly, glancing at me. What's wrong? I stared straight ahead through the windshield, watching nothing in particular. I went to the doctor yesterday, I said slowly. He told me I have early-stage dementia. Darius didn't move at first. Then I saw his hands tighten around the steering wheel. The dashboard lights cast a pale glow over his knuckles, which had gone almost white. His jaw flexed. He kept his eyes forward. What doctor? He asked carefully. Dr. Lawson, I replied. Lillian made the appointment. Geriatric specialist in Pasadena. Darius inhaled slowly like he was bracing himself. What did he say? He asked. I let out a hollow breath. He ran memory tests. Asked me what year it was. Who the president is. Made me draw a clock. Had me remember words. Count backward from 100 by 7s. And Darius asked. I thought I did fine, I said helplessly. I remembered the words. 4 out of 5. I drew the clock correctly. I counted down to the 30s before he stopped me. Darius turned his head, slightly studying my face. Did you get anything clearly wrong? He asked. No, I said. He said it wasn't about wrong answers. It was about patterns. Subtle hesitations. Things I couldn't see, but he could. The car was still idling in the lot. For a long moment, Darius said nothing. Then quietly, but with unmistakable intensity, he said, "Mr. Mercer, I don't believe you have dementia." I blinked. "What?" "You teach advanced technical classes 3 nights a week," he continued. "Circuit design, systems, troubleshooting. You remember detailed conversations we've had. You remember that my daughter wants to study aerospace engineering. You remember I used to work in insurance fraud. You remembered how I take my coffee." His voice was rising, not in volume but in urgency. "That's not cognitive decline," he said. "That's clarity." "But the doctor," I began. "Someone wants you to think you're sick." Darius interrupted, his tone sharpening. "Because if you believe you can't trust your own mind, you'll let other people make decisions for you." I felt irritation flare. "Darius the First," said, forcing a laugh that didn't feel natural. "Why would anyone do that?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't pity. It wasn't suspicion. It was alarm. "Is Lillian asking about your finances more often?" he asked quietly. "She's being responsible," I snapped. "She's my daughter." "Is she?" he said. The question landed between us like something fragile and dangerous. I opened my mouth to defend her, but something in his voice stopped me. Without another word, Darius reached into the pocket behind his seat and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it and turned the screen toward me. Voice memos. 4 recordings. Tristan M., November 9th. Tristan M., November 14th. Tristan M., November 17th. Tristan M., November 24th. My brows knit together. "Who's Tristan?" I asked. Darius's voice was steady but tight beneath the surface. "Your son-in-law?" The world shifted slightly. "I've been driving him," Darius said. "For 3 weeks. He doesn't know I drive you. He doesn't know we're connected. And he's been talking." My throat went dry. "Talking about what?" you, Darius said. "Your house? Your money? A plan." "That's impossible," I said immediately. Tristan wouldn't. He talked about Dr. Lawson. Darius cut in. About paying him $10,000 for a diagnosis. About getting power of attorney. About placing you in a facility. My pulse began to pound. "No," I whispered. "He talked about your address," Darius continued. "Cedar Street. About the value of your home. About $400,000 in debt." The words felt surreal. "He hired 2 men," Darius said, "to persuade you if you refused to sign paperwork." My stomach turned. He said, "Make it look like he fell." The air seemed to leave the car. I stared at him. "That's insane," I said weakly. "You must have misunderstood." I recorded everything Darius said. His voice didn't waver. "I have 4 separate conversations. Dates, times, names." He held the phone between us like evidence in a courtroom. "I need you to hear them," he said. "Not here. Not in the parking lot. But somewhere private." I shook my head, trying to slow my racing thoughts. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tonight?" Darius's eyes met mine, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for me. "Because Wednesday night," he said quietly, "2 men are supposed to be inside your house." The words hit like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe for a second. "After 10:30, he continued. "After you get home from volunteering." My mind scrambled backward. Wednesday. Tomorrow was Wednesday. "Tomorrow might be too late," he said. The silence inside the car was deafening. Darius had always been calm, steady, thoughtful. He waited until I was inside before driving away. He remembered my routines. He shared stories about his daughter. He had never once overstepped. And now he was asking me to trust him over my own blood. I looked down at the phone again. 4 recordings. 4 dates. Tristan's name? "What's on them?" I asked quietly. "The whole plan," Darius said. "From the beginning." My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct told me this was absurd. But another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered something else. Lillian's questions about my will. The sudden appointment. Dr. Lawson's diagnosis. The word denial. The recommendation for assisted living. A pattern. Subtle. I closed my eyes and took a slow, steady breath. When I opened them, Darius was still watching me, waiting, trusting me to decide. "Okay," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come inside." The tension in his shoulders eased just slightly. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and put the car into drive. "Thank you," he said softly. We pulled out of the lot and onto the dark Pasadena streets. Streetlights streaked across the windshield. Neither of us spoke. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded proof before agreeing. I should have told him to take me home and forget the whole thing. But something in his voice, something unpolished and urgent, told me this wasn't paranoia. It was warning. And as we turned onto Cedar Street, I realized something chilling. If Darius was right, then the appointment, the diagnosis, the tears, none of it had been about protecting me. It had been about positioning me. And tomorrow night, someone was scheduled to make sure I never objected. We never made it inside, because Darius saw what I didn't. He turned onto Cedar Street the way he always did, headlights cutting a familiar path along the quiet row of homes. I sat beside him in silence, my thoughts tangled and racing. Recordings, Tristan, a plan. None of it felt real. It felt like the kind of story you hear about someone else, someone careless, someone naive. Not me, not my family. Mr. Mercer Darius said quietly, eyes fixed on the road. "I need to drive past your house once before we stop." I frowned. "Why?" "Please," he said. "Just trust me." There was something in his tone, controlled but tight, that made me nod. He slowed as we approached my house. The wide front porch came into view. The jacaranda tree stood motionless in the yard. The detached garage door was closed. The porch light glowed softly, just as it always did when I was out late. Everything looked normal, safe. But Darius wasn't looking at the house. He was scanning the street. Then I saw his grip tighten on the steering wheel. "Don't react," he murmured. "Just keep looking forward." My pulse spiked. "What?" "Act normal," he said, low and firm. I forced myself to stare ahead, trying to see what he was seeing. At first, nothing stood out. A few parked cars, dark windows, still air. Then my eyes adjusted. Across the street from my house stood two men, large, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark hoodies with their hands in their pockets. They weren't talking. They weren't pacing. They were simply standing there, watching. I had lived on that street for 3 decades. I knew my neighbors' dogs by name. I had never seen those men before. Darius drove past them without slowing. He didn't turn into my driveway. He didn't hesitate. He kept going as though he had forgotten the street entirely. Darius the First whispered my throat tight. "What is?" "Not yet," he said. We turned the corner, and that's when I saw the car. A gray Honda Civic sat parked at the curb on the next block. The engine was running, taillights glowing faintly in the dark, but the headlights were off. And in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, was Tristan, my son-in-law, 1 block from my house, in the dark, waiting. Darius continued driving. Left turn, another left, looping the block calmly, deliberately, as if this were just another quiet Tuesday night. He didn't speak until we were several streets away. Then he pulled into an empty parking lot behind a Vaughn's grocery store and shifted the car into park. The engine idled softly. He turned to face me. "There were 2 men outside your house," he said evenly. "They were waiting." My mouth felt dry. For me, I asked, "Yes, who are they?" "I don't know their names," Darius said. "But I know why they're there." He pulled out his phone and opened the voice memos app. "Your son-in-law hired them." The words didn't register at first. "Hired them," I repeated. "For what?" Darius tapped the most recent file. Tristan M. November 24th. He hit play. Tristan's voice filled the car. Clear, confident, cold. "Wednesday night, when he gets home from volunteering, you go in. He'll be alone. Just get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses," a pause. Another voice faint. "We know what to do." Tristan again. "Make it clean. Old man, heart attack, whatever. Just make it look natural." Darius stopped the recording. The silence afterward was suffocating. That was Friday, he said quietly. He said Wednesday night. Tonight is Tuesday, I swallowed. Tomorrow, I whispered. Darius nodded. They were either early, he said, or they're scouting. Either way, they're positioned. My chest tightened. Tristan, I said, barely able to form the words. He hired people to hurt me. Yes, and Lillian. My voice cracked. Does she know? Darius hesitated. In one recording, he said carefully, Tristan said she doesn't know about the physical part. The physical part, I repeated hollowly, but she knows about the rest. He continued. The doctor, the diagnosis, the power of attorney, the appointment slip. Dr. Lawson, assisted living, supervision, denial. It all rearranged itself in my mind. Not concern, preparation. I don't understand, I whispered. Why would they do this? Darius's answer was simple. Money. He met my eyes. Your house, your retirement accounts. Tristan mentioned $400,000 in debt. He needs cash. Fast. I leaned back against the seat. Lillian's tears in the doctor's office. Her trembling voice. Dad, we'll figure this out together. Was it real or rehearsed? I felt something inside me fracture. We have to go to the police, I said finally. Yes, Darius replied immediately. Right now. He shifted the car into drive. As we pulled out of the lot, I looked back in the direction of my house, the place Margaret and I had built together, the lemon tree she had planted, the porch where we had watched summer storms roll in. Two men had been standing outside it, waiting. Mr. Mercer, Darius said quietly, as we accelerated toward the main road. If I hadn't been driving Tristan these past few weeks. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. If he hadn't overheard. If he hadn't recorded. If he hadn't paid attention. If he had looked away. Tomorrow night, I would have walked through my front door, believing I was simply tired from volunteering. Believing my daughter was worried about my memory. Believing a doctor's diagnosis. And two men would have followed. The city lights streaked past us as Darius drove faster than usual, controlled but urgent. For months after Margaret died, I had felt grief, loneliness, emptiness. But this was different. This was fear. Not abstract, not distant, immediate, real. For the first time in 30 years, I was afraid of my own front porch. And for the first time since my wife's funeral, I realized something else. I had almost mistaken love for loyalty. And loyalty for safety. Darius gripped the wheel firmly as we headed toward the police station, and I sat in the passenger seat, heart pounding, listening to the echo of Tristan's voice in my mind. Make it look natural, old man. Heart attack, whatever works. Tomorrow night, I had 6 days, then 5, now less than 24 hours. And if Darius hadn't driven past my house, I would have stepped out of his car, waved goodbye, and walked straight into something I never would have survived. If you're still here, comment something, so I know you're with me. If you were in Calvin's seat that night, seeing two strangers outside your house, and hearing that recording, would you have trusted Darius? Or walked through your front door anyway? Tell me what you would have done. And before we continue, a note. The next story includes dramatized elements. If that's not for you, this is a natural place to stop. Like me, I said. He smiled faintly. Darius turned into the dark parking lot behind the closed Vons and eased the car into a space beneath a flickering streetlight. The store was shuttered, the lot nearly empty, the night air heavy and still. He shut off the engine, but he did not release the steering wheel. His hands remained locked around it, knuckles pale in the dim light. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, his voice steady but urgent. I need you to listen to me. I'm going to tell you everything I know. I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that? My throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped a cord around it. I nodded. Darius drew in a slow breath. For the past 3 weeks, I've been driving your son-in-law, Tristan Maddox. He's requested rides several times. And when he drinks, he talks. I stared at him, my mind lagging behind his words. He's been talking about an old man in Pasadena, Darius continued. A house worth over $2 million. Retirement accounts. A daughter named Lillian. And a plan. He reached into the pocket behind his seat and pulled out his phone. I recorded him, he said. I know it's ethically questionable. I know I could lose my job. But I couldn't ignore what I was hearing. He unlocked the screen and turned it toward me. Voice memos. 4 recordings. 4 dates. I'm going to play them, he said. All of them. He tapped the first file. Tristan M. November 9th. Tristan's voice filled the car, slurred, arrogant, careless. Goddamn old man sitting on all that money doing nothing with it. The house in Pasadena alone is worth over $2 million. Plus the retirement accounts. We're talking $3 million easy. The sound of a car door closing in the background. Just get the paperwork signed. Once he's declared incompetent, we move him into a facility. Then we sell the house and liquidate the accounts. Simple. The recording ended. My chest felt tight as though the air had thinned around me. That was 3 weeks ago, Darius said softly. The first time I drove him. He pressed the second file. Tristan M. November 14th. This time Tristan's voice was clearer. Less drunken, more deliberate. The doctor Ag Vaughn. Dr. Lawson. $10,000. He'll sign the paperwork. Says the old man has early onset cognitive decline. My stomach dropped. That's not I started. Darius raised a hand, gently. Please. The recording continued. After that, we get power of attorney. Move him into a facility. Sell the house. Easy. Another voice, faint in the background. What about Lillian? Tristan answered without hesitation. She's on board. She's the one who set up the doctor's appointment. Between the two of us, we're $400,000 in debt. They're coming to collect. The words struck like physical blows. I pressed my hands against my face. This can't be real, I whispered. Darius moved to the third recording. Tristan M. November 17th. Tristan's tone had changed. It was colder now. I hired them. 2 guys. They know what to do. A pause. If the old man signs the paperwork, great. If he doesn't, they'll persuade him. A second voice. How hard? Tristan laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound. Whatever it takes. Just don't leave marks. Make it look like he fell or something. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. He's talking about I choked. Yes, Darius said quietly. Tristan's voice continued. Lillian doesn't know about this part. She thinks we're just moving him into a care facility nice and clean. But I'm not taking any chances. The recording stopped. Darius met my eyes. He's not talking about intimidation, he said gently. He's talking about making sure you don't stand in the way. I felt frozen in place as though my body no longer belonged to me. Darius tapped the final recording. Tristan M. November 24th. Tristan's voice this time was sober, controlled, precise. Let me confirm the timeline. The doctor sees him on Monday. Dr. Lawson signs the paperwork. Cognitive decline. We'll have power of attorney by Wednesday. A brief pause. Wednesday night, when he gets home from volunteering, you go in. He'll be alone. Just get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses, another voice, we know what to do. Tristan's reply was calm. Make it clean. Old man, heart attack. Whatever. Just make it look natural. Darius stopped the playback. Today is Tuesday, he said quietly. Tomorrow is Wednesday. The men outside your house tonight, those are the men he hired. Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't realized I was crying until they fell onto my hands. Lillian, I whispered hoarsely. My daughter. Darius's voice softened. In the recordings, Tristan says she doesn't know about the violence, but she knew about the doctor, the diagnosis, the power of attorney. The room seemed to tilt, the appointment slip, the tears in the office, the word denial. I bent forward, burying my face in my hands. The sobs came without warning, deep, raw, tearing through me. My daughter, I managed, my only child. Darius didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply waited. I welcomed him into my home, I said between broken breaths. I trusted them. The grief that had followed Margaret's death had hollowed me out. This felt different. This felt like the floor beneath me collapsing entirely. A stranger, someone I had met because I could no longer safely drive at night, had risked his livelihood to protect me. My own family had calculated my death as a financial solution. When the sobbing finally subsided, I sat back slowly, exhausted. "What do?" I whispered. Darius reached over and rested a steady hand on my shoulder. "We go to the police," he said. "Now." I nodded, unable to speak. He started the engine. The car hummed back to life. As we pulled out of the lot, the flickering streetlight cast long shadows across the windshield. I watched the empty streets slide past the houses, dark and quiet, unaware of the violence that had almost entered one of them. Margaret was gone. Lillian had betrayed me. Tristan had plotted my removal like a business transaction. And in that moment, driving toward the police station, with a man who owed me nothing but kindness, I understood something I never had before. Loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the realization that the people you trusted most were never truly on your side. For the first time in my life, I felt stripped of illusion, and I knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. Darius didn't ask for my permission. He didn't debate. He didn't hesitate. He started the engine and drove straight to the police station. I sat beside him in stunned silence, watching Pasadena slide past in streaks of amber and shadow. Traffic lights changed. Storefronts stood dark and empty. Sidewalks were deserted. Everything looked exactly as it always had, and yet nothing would ever be the same again. At 11:45 p.m., Darius turned into the parking lot of the Pasadena Police Department on North Garfield Avenue. The building stood stark and illuminated against the night sky, glass, steel, and authority. He cut the engine and looked at me. "Are you ready?" he asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We stepped inside together. The lobby was bright and clinical fluorescent lights, reflecting off pale tile floors. A young officer sat behind the front desk, rubbing his eyes as if the night shift had already stretched too long. "Can I help you?" he asked. Darius stepped forward without hesitation. "My name is Darius Vaughn," he said clearly. "This is Calvin Mercer. His life is in danger tonight. His family is conspiring to defraud him and harm him. I have audio recordings as evidence." The officer straightened immediately. "Recordings?" he asked. "Yes," Darius replied. 4 separate recordings over 3 weeks. I need a detective. Now." The officer picked up his desk phone. Within minutes, a man in a wrinkled suit entered the lobby. He looked to be in his mid-50s. Graying hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that had seen enough to recognize seriousness when it walked in. "I'm Detective Sullivan," he said. "Come with me." He led us down a hallway into a small interview room, table chairs, wall-mounted recorder, humming softly in standby mode. "Start from the beginning," Sullivan said. I drew in a slow breath. I told him about Margaret, about the accident on the 210 freeway 8 months earlier, about the long, quiet months that followed. I told him how Lillian had begun visiting more often, how she asked about my will, my retirement accounts, my beneficiaries. I described Dr. Lawson's office, the tests, the diagnosis, the prescription for donepezil. Darius took over after that. He explained how he had been driving Tristan Maddox, my son-in-law, for 3 weeks, how Tristan talked when he drank, how those conversations escalated. Darius placed his phone on the table. "I recorded him," he said. "I understand the legal gray area, but I knew something was wrong." Detective Sullivan leaned forward. "Did the passenger consent to recording?" "Uber's terms of service allow recording for safety purposes," Darius replied. "Passengers consent by using the service. It's documented." Sullivan nodded once. "Play them." Darius pressed play. One by one, Tristan's voice filled the small room. "House worth over $2 million. Power of attorney. Dr. Lawson, $10,000. Hired 2 guys. Persuade him. Make it look like he fell. Wednesday night. Make it look natural. The final recording ended. Silence settled heavily over the room. Detective Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "do you consent to us opening an immediate investigation into your daughter and son-in-law?" The words felt like broken glass in my throat. "Yes," I managed. Sullivan stood up abruptly and stepped into the hallway. "Ramirez," he called, "get Captain Torres. We're mobilizing." The station transformed in minutes. Radios crackled. Officers in tactical gear moved with urgency. Addresses were written on whiteboards. Maps pulled up on monitors. Sullivan returned. "3 teams," he said. "1 to your residence. 1 to Maddox's address in Glendale. 1 to Lillian Maddox's address in Arcadia. We'll have them secured." I nodded, unable to find my voice. At 2:30 a.m., Sullivan's radio crackled. Team 1 reporting. 2 suspects apprehended outside 1247 Cedar Street. Both armed. Handgun recovered. Zip ties and duct tape located in vehicle. Sullivan looked at me steadily. "Those are your men." My stomach churned. Another voice came through the radio. Team 2 reporting. Tristan Maddox in custody. Glendale address secured. Charges pending: conspiracy to commit elder abuse, conspiracy to commit assault fraud. Moments later, Team 3 reporting. Lillian Maddox in custody. Arcadia address secured. Charges pending: conspiracy to commit financial exploitation and fraud. The room felt smaller, quieter, final. Sullivan turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer," he said evenly, "if you had gone home tonight, you likely would not have survived." The words landed like a verdict. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "We're seizing digital devices," Sullivan continued. "Phones, computers, financial records. From what I've heard tonight, this case is strong. Airtight." At 3:30 a.m., Darius and I stepped back outside into the cold night air. The sky was still dark. The world felt unchanged. But my life had just been cleaved in 2. I stood on the sidewalk trying to comprehend what had just happened. Margaret was gone. Lillian was in custody. Tristan was in custody. 2 men had been waiting outside my home with a handgun and restraints. "Mr. Mercer," Darius said gently, "you can't go back tonight. Your house is a crime scene, and you shouldn't be alone." I looked at him, exhausted beyond words. "Where do I go?" "My place," he said. "It's not fancy, but you'll be safe. Keisha and I have a spare room." I hesitated only a second before nodding. He drove through quiet streets toward Inglewood. The city seemed impossibly peaceful, as if none of this had happened, as if betrayal hadn't just been exposed, as if death hadn't been scheduled. As we turned onto his street, Darius glanced over. "You're about to meet my daughter," he said softly. "Keisha. She's 16. Smart as hell. Wants to be an aerospace engineer." A small, fragile warmth stirred in my chest. "Yeah, like you." And for the first time since that night began, since the parking lot, since the recordings, since the sight of 2 men outside my house, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not peace, but the faintest outline of hope. Darius's house in Inglewood was modest. 1-story narrow driveway, paint slightly faded from the California sun. But the moment I stepped inside at 4 in the morning, I felt something my own house had not held in months. Warmth, not from the heater, from the life inside it. The neighborhood was still and quiet when we arrived. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A single porch light flickered across the street. The world looked ordinary, unaware that mine had just collapsed and been rebuilt in the same night. Darius unlocked the front door and ushered me in. The living room was small but lived in. A worn gray couch. A coffee table cluttered with notebooks and highlighters. A bookshelf sagging slightly under the weight of novels, engineering manuals, and SAT prep guides. A faint scent of laundry detergent and coffee lingered in the air. Keisha, Darius called gently. "Can you come down for a second?" A few moments later, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. A teenage girl appeared at the bottom landing, rubbing her eyes. She wore an oversized Caltech sweatshirt and pajama pants decorated with tiny constellations. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and sleep still clung to her voice. "Dad," she asked, "is everything okay?" Darius rested a steady hand on her shoulder. "Keisha, this is Mr. Mercer Calvin. He's going to stay with us for a few days. He's had a difficult night." She looked at me fully then. No suspicion, no annoyance at being woken up, just concern. "Hi, Mr. Mercer," she said softly. "Hi, Keisha," I replied. Darius kept the explanation brief. "I couldn't stay at my house. There was a situation. I needed somewhere safe." Keisha didn't ask invasive questions. She simply nodded. "He can have my room," she said. "I'll take the couch." "Keisha, that's not necessary," I began. "It's fine," she insisted with a small smile. "I study late all the time anyway." Darius squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you." She led me upstairs. Her room was small but full of ambition. Posters of the solar system covered one wall. A framed image of the Hubble Space Telescope hung beside a detailed diagram of the Mars Curiosity rover. On her desk sat stacks of calculus and physics textbooks, pages bristling with sticky notes. In the corner, a partially assembled Saturn V rocket model stood mid-construction. I paused in the doorway. "You really mean it," I said quietly. "You want to be an aerospace engineer." Her grin lit up the room. "Dad told me you worked at JPL," she said eagerly. "Is that true?" "For 32 years," I answered. Her eyes widened. "What did you work on?" "Thermal management systems," I said. "Voyager, Mars rovers. Missions that had to survive extreme cold and vacuum." She leaned against her desk, captivated. "You worked on Voyager," she whispered. "Yes. The golden record." I nodded. She shook her head in awe. "That's incredible." Something shifted inside me. For months after Margaret died, I had felt hollow. Useless. Like the most meaningful parts of my life had already ended. Standing in that room, surrounded by posters of distant galaxies and the dreams of a 16-year-old girl, I felt something stir again. Contribution. Connection. "Get some rest, Mr. Mercer," Keisha said gently. "We can talk more tomorrow." "Thank you," I said. She slipped out quietly, closing the door behind her. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked around. Dreams covered the walls. Lillian's room when she was that age had been filled with art sketches and accounting textbooks. I had believed in her future as fiercely as she believed in herself. Now that memory felt fragile. Darius appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Your daughter is extraordinary," I said. He smiled faintly. "I know. Everything I do is for her. She's lucky." He nodded once. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be long." The next 3 days passed in a strange blur. I remained at Darius's house while Detective Sullivan kept me informed. On Wednesday afternoon, Sullivan called. "We found emails between Tristan Maddox and Dr. Richard Lawson," he said. "Bank records confirm a $10,000 transfer labeled as a consulting fee. Lawson's in serious trouble." I closed my eyes. "So the diagnosis, all of it," fabricated Sullivan confirmed, completely. The word felt heavy and liberating at the same time. On Thursday, Sullivan called again. "We executed a search warrant at Lillian's apartment," he said. "Credit card debt exceeding $220,000. Gambling losses. Loans from illegal lenders. We also discovered she was terminated from her accounting firm 18 months ago for embezzlement." The room felt smaller. "She told me she quit," I said. "She didn't," Sullivan replied quietly. There was a pause before he continued. "The 2 men we arrested outside your house have cooperated. Tristan paid them $5,000 each. Their instructions were to coerce you into signing asset transfer documents. If you refused, they were told to stage an accident." I swallowed. "And Lillian, she admits to the financial scheme," Sullivan said carefully. "She knew about the false diagnosis and the plan for power of attorney. She claims she didn't know about the violence. Do you believe her?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But that will be for the courts to determine." On Friday, Sullivan called one last time. "Dr. Lawson has been arrested," he said. "We uncovered falsified medical records tied to at least 12 other elderly patients over 5 years. This wasn't isolated. It was a pattern. 12 others. 12 lives manipulated. You weren't the first, Sullivan said. But because of you, you'll likely be the last. After that call, I sat silently on Darius's couch for a long time. 12 families, 12 stolen inheritances, 12 men or women who trusted a white coat and a calm voice. That week, Keisha and I talked endlessly. She asked about Voyager's trajectory beyond the heliosphere, about the engineering behind the Mars rovers surviving dust storms, about designing systems that could function at -100 degrees Celsius. I described long nights at JPL, testing chambers, failure simulations, the thrill of receiving signals from millions of miles away. She listened as though I were describing magic, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt useful. Friday night, Darius and Keisha cooked dinner, spaghetti garlic bread, simple and comforting. We sat at their small kitchen table. For a moment, it felt like something I had lost had been returned in a different form. After Keisha went upstairs, Darius and I remained in the living room. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I stared at my hands for a long time. "I don't know if I can forgive Lillian," I said finally. "But I know I can't trust her again." Darius nodded slowly. "She's my daughter," I added, my voice breaking. "And she tried to dismantle my life." He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're going to survive this," he said. "You already did." I looked at him, this man who had risked his livelihood, who had opened his home without hesitation, who had stood between me and death. "Thank you," I said, "for saving my life." He shook his head slightly. "You're family now." And sitting in that small house in Inglewood, surrounded by textbooks and rocket diagrams and quiet resilience, I realized something profound. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the person who refuses to look away when everyone else does. 6 months later, I found myself seated in a Pasadena courtroom, watching the consequences of betrayal unfold in real time. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Tristan Maddox faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and multiple counts of fraud. Lillian was charged with financial exploitation of an elder and conspiracy to commit fraud, but not attempted murder. Dr. Richard Lawson stood accused of medical fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying medical records. The 2 men Tristan had hired were charged with conspiracy to commit assault and attempted extortion. The courtroom was rarely empty. Reporters filled the back rows. Observers leaned forward in their seats. People who had followed the story and headlines came to witness its ending. I sat in the front row every day, hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Darius sat beside me, having taken time off work to attend. Keisha sat on his other side, her hand resting lightly on his arm whenever testimony turned particularly dark. The first week was devoted almost entirely to evidence. The prosecution began with the recordings. One by one, the 4 audio files Darius had captured were played in open court. Tristan's voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, sometimes slurred, sometimes sober, always calculating. House worth over $2 million. Power of attorney. Dr. Lawson, $10,000. Cognitive decline. Hired 2 guys. Make it look like he fell. Wednesday night you go in. The jurors listened without interruption. Some stared straight ahead, expressionless. Others visibly stiffened. A few exchanged glances that carried something close to disbelief. The prosecution then presented email correspondence between Tristan and Dr. Lawson. Financial records confirmed the $10,000 consulting fee. Bank statements laid bare Lillian's $220,000 debt. Gambling withdrawals, high-interest loans, payments to unlicensed lenders. Finally, medical records were introduced, files showing that Dr. Lawson had falsified diagnoses for at least 12 elderly patients over 5 years. 12. I had nearly been the 13th. By the end of the first week, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The second week belonged to testimony. Darius was called first. He walked to the stand wearing a simple gray suit. No theatrics, no hesitation. He spoke the way he always did, clear, steady, measured. The prosecutor asked how we met. I'm a rideshare driver, Darius explained. Mr. Mercer became a regular passenger. We developed a friendship. And Tristan Maddox, the prosecutor asked. He was also a passenger, Darius replied. Multiple times, often intoxicated. He talked freely. Darius described overhearing Tristan discuss an old man in Pasadena, a house worth millions, a daughter named Lillian, a strategy involving power of attorney. Why did you record him? The prosecutor asked. Darius looked directly at the jury. I'm a former insurance fraud investigator, he said. For 12 years, I investigated people who exploited vulnerable populations. 3 years ago, I tried to stop a physician who was defrauding elderly patients. I was terminated for pursuing it. He paused. I couldn't ignore what I was hearing. Not again. And what did you do once you had the recordings? I confronted Mr. Mercer. Then we went to the police. Why not go to the police first? Darius answered without hesitation. Because Mr. Mercer needed to hear it himself. He needed to understand the danger came from his own family. It had to be his decision. The prosecutor's final question hung in the air. If Mr. Mercer had gone home that night, do you believe he would have survived? Darius did not look at me. He looked at the jury. No, he said firmly. The men were waiting, armed, prepared. If he had walked through that door, he would not have walked back out. Silence followed. Then it was my turn. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than the hallway from the police lobby months earlier. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor guided me gently through my life before November. I spoke about Margaret, about 42 years of marriage, about the accident on the 210 freeway, about grief that hollowed out every room in my house. I described Lillian visiting more frequently after the funeral, the questions about my will, my retirement accounts, beneficiaries. At the time, did you find her questions suspicious? The prosecutor asked. No, I said. I thought she was worried about me. And now, I looked at my daughter across the courtroom. Her hair was pulled back, her face thinner than I remembered, eyes rimmed red. Now I understand she was positioning herself, I said quietly. I described Dr. Lawson's office, the clock drawing, the memory tests, the prescription for donepezil. Did you believe you had dementia? The prosecutor asked. At first, yes, I admitted. Then Darius told me someone might want me to think I was sick, so I would surrender control. And was he right? Yes. The prosecutor paused before the final question. Do you believe your daughter intended for you to be killed? The courtroom held its breath. I considered my answer carefully. No, I said at last. I don't believe Lillian wanted me dead, but I believe she wanted my money badly enough that she stopped asking what Tristan was willing to do. I looked at her. I don't think she wanted to know. The defense's week followed. Lillian took the stand in a simple blue dress. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered. Her attorney asked her to explain. I made terrible decisions, she said, voice trembling. I was in debt, gambling, loans. I owed over $200,000. The people I owed were threatening me. She wiped her eyes. Tristan said he had a solution. Power of attorney, assisted living, sell the house, pay everything off. He said it would be controlled, legal, that my dad would be safe. Did you know he hired men to harm your father? Her lawyer asked. Lillian shook her head violently. No, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Her voice cracked. I thought he'd just be moved somewhere nice. I didn't know about the men. I didn't know he planned to hurt him. She turned toward me. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I never wanted you dead. Her sobs filled the room. I did not respond. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. When they returned, the courtroom filled again. Tristan Maddox was found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. Dr. Lawson was convicted of medical fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of records. The 2 hired men were convicted of conspiracy to commit assault and attempted extortion. Lillian was found guilty of financial exploitation of an elder and conspiracy to commit fraud, but not guilty of attempted murder. The sentences followed weeks later. Tristan received a lengthy prison term, effectively decades behind bars. Dr. Lawson lost his medical license and received a substantial sentence. The hired men were sentenced to years in state prison. Lillian received a reduced sentence, several years, with eligibility for parole, based on cooperation and lack of direct involvement in the violence. When the judge read the verdicts, I felt no triumph, no relief, only a quiet, aching finality. After the proceedings ended, Darius stood beside me outside the courthouse. "You did the right thing," he said. I nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel like it," I admitted. He understood. 6 months earlier, I had nearly lost my life. Now I had lost something else. But standing there beside the man who refused to look away, and knowing his daughter was already filling out scholarship applications to study aerospace engineering, I realized something. Justice doesn't erase betrayal. It simply prevents it from continuing. And sometimes survival is the only victory you're going to get. When the jury returned to the courtroom, silence fell like a heavy curtain over every person in the room. I sat in the front row, Darius beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. After 3 weeks of testimony, 4 audio recordings played repeatedly in open court emails documenting a $10,000 bribe, falsified medical records for over a dozen elderly patients, and tearful confessions from my daughter Lillian, the 12 jurors filed into the jury box without expression. Their faces were blank, unreadable, as if they had seen something that had drained them of emotion. Judge Anderson, a gray-haired man in his 60s with deep lines around his eyes, looked out over the packed courtroom. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised. Family members of other victims sat to my left. Darius's daughter Keisha, now 17 and preparing for her freshman year at Caltech, sat beside her father. She had become like family to me over the past 6 months. The judge asked the foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a blue sweater, to read the verdicts. In the matter of the state of California versus Tristanley James Maddox, she began, her voice flat and careful. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to cause serious bodily harm with intent to defraud, we find the defendant guilty. Tristan, seated at the defense table in an orange Los Angeles County Jail jumpsuit, showed no emotion. His attorney, a young man in an expensive suit, placed a hand on his arm. But Tristan simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I saw no remorse, no fear, only a cold calculation that this day had always been a possibility. In the matter of the state of California versus Lillian Lynn Mercer Maddox, the foreperson continued. On the charge of financial exploitation of an elder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Lillian gasped, a sharp intake of breath that carried across the silent room. She turned toward me, tears streaming down her face, but I looked away. I could not meet her eyes. Not yet. In the matter of the state of California versus Dr. Richard Lawson, the foreperson said, on the charge of medical fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of falsifying medical records, we find the defendant guilty. Dr. Lawson, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dropped his head into his hands. His attorney leaned in and whispered urgently, but the doctor did not respond. He simply sat there, shoulders shaking. In the matter of the state of California versus Harold Eugene Martinez and Tyrell James Collins, the foreperson concluded. Referring to the 2 hired men who had waited outside my house that Wednesday night with a handgun, zip ties, and duct tape, on the charges of conspiracy to commit assault and attempted extortion, we find both defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Several reporters stood to leave. Judge Anderson struck his gavel 3 times, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "Order," This court will reconvene in 2 weeks for sentencing. All defendants are remanded into custody. Bailiff, please escort the defendants. 2 weeks later, I returned to the same courtroom for sentencing. The gallery was just as full, perhaps more so. Darius sat beside me again. Keisha had an exam at school, but she had sent me a text that morning. "You've got this, Mr. Mercer. You're braver than you think." Judge Anderson addressed each defendant in turn, starting with Tristan Maddox. "Mr. Maddox," the judge said, his voice stern, "you orchestrated a scheme designed to strip an elderly man of his autonomy, his assets, and quite possibly his life. You paid $10,000 to a corrupt physician to falsify a diagnosis. You hired 2 men with criminal records to wait outside Mr. Mercer's home with weapons and restraints. You did all of this while your wife, the victim's own daughter, manipulated and gaslighted him. The prosecution has argued for the maximum sentence, and after reviewing the evidence, I agree. You are sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison." Tristan's face remained blank. His attorney whispered something, but Tristan simply nodded once. Next, the judge turned to Lillian. "Ms. Mercer Maddox," Judge Anderson said, his tone softer but still firm. "The court acknowledges that you were under significant financial pressure. A $220,000 gambling debt, a history of job loss due to embezzlement, and manipulation by your husband are all mitigating factors. However, you actively participated in this conspiracy. You gaslighted your own father, made him doubt his memory, scheduled a fraudulent medical appointment, and attempted to secure power of attorney under false pretenses. You betrayed your own father for money. That is a wound that may never heal. You are sentenced to 12 years in state prison." Lillian's attorney stood and began to argue for a reduced sentence, but the judge raised his hand. "The sentence stands," he said. Dr. Lawson was next. "Dr. Lawson," Judge Anderson said, his voice filled with disgust. "You exploited the trust society places in physicians. Over a period of at least 5 years, you falsified diagnoses for a minimum of 12 elderly patients, accepting payments ranging from $5,000 to $15,000. You destroyed lives for profit. You are a danger to the vulnerable. You are sentenced to 8 years in state prison, and your medical license is permanently revoked." Dr. Lawson did not look up. Finally, the judge addressed Harold Martinez and Tyrell Collins. "Mr. Martinez and Mr. Collins," he said, "you were hired to commit violence against an elderly man for $5,000 each. You both have prior felony records. You waited outside his home with weapons and restraints. The only reason you did not succeed was that Mr. Mercer never entered his home that night. You are each sentenced to 15 years in state prison." Before the hearing concluded, Judge Anderson looked at me. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "the court recognizes your courage in coming forward. You have the opportunity to make a victim impact statement if you wish." I stood my legs, trembling. I turned to face Lillian, who sat at the defense table in a gray jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. "Lillian," I began, my voice breaking, "you were my only daughter. I held you the day you were born at Huntington Memorial Hospital. I taught you to ride a bike on Cedar Street. I sat in the audience at your high school graduation. I walked you down the aisle on your wedding day. When your mother Margaret died 8 months ago in a highway accident, you were the first person I called. You came to the funeral. You hugged me. You promised you would always be there for me." Lillian sobbed, her shoulders shaking violently. "But you chose something else." I continued, tears streaming down my face. "You chose debt over family. You chose lies over love. You brought me to a fraudulent doctor who diagnosed me with a disease I did not have, so you and your husband could take my home, my savings, and my F. Vonum. You scheduled a fake appointment for a Monday, knowing that 2 days later, on Wednesday night, men with weapons would be waiting outside my house to force me to sign away everything, or worse. I paused, trying to steady my voice. If my rideshare driver Darius Vaughn had not been paying attention, if he had not recognized your husband Tristan from previous rides, if he had not recorded Tristan's drunken confessions, if he had not driven past my house that Wednesday night instead of stopping, I would have walked through my front door and into a trap. I would not be standing here today. Lillian looked up, her face red and swollen with tears. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to get hurt. I will always love you, Lillian, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. But I will never trust you again. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. As the bailiff stepped forward to lead Lillian away, she turned back one last time, her voice choked with sobs. I love you, Dad. I nodded, but I felt nothing inside. No peace, no satisfaction, only a deep, bottomless emptiness that seemed to expand with every breath. Darius placed his hand on my shoulder. Let's go home, he said softly. We walked out of the Pasadena courthouse into the bright California sunlight. The trial was over. Justice had been served. But as I climbed into Darius's car and watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror, I realized something. The wound Lillian had left would take years to heal, if it ever did. 2 years have passed since the night Darius drove past my house instead of stopping. I am 70 years old now. I still live in the same craftsman-style house on Cedar Street in Pasadena. The house Margaret and I bought decades ago for a little under $400,000. The house that is now worth over $2 million. The house my daughter Lillian and her husband Tristan Maddox tried to steal from me. But I am no longer alone. 6 months after the trial, Darius and his daughter Keisha moved in with me. Darius no longer drives for Uber. Technically, I hired him as my personal assistant, helping me manage my finances, coordinate my volunteer work at the VA Medical Center, and maintain the house. But that is just a formality. In reality, we treat each other like family. Keisha is 18 now. Last fall, she was accepted into the California Institute of Technology, known to everyone in Pasadena simply as Caltech, with a major in aerospace engineering. When the acceptance letter arrived, she ran through the house, screaming, waving the envelope in the air. Darius cried. I cried too, remembering the first night I met her, a quiet 16-year-old girl with a poster of the Hubble Space Telescope on her bedroom wall and a half-built model of the Saturn V rocket on her desk. I cover all of Keisha's tuition, housing, and living expenses. It is not charity. It is an investment in a brilliant young mind, and more than that, it is what family does. In return, Keisha lets me be her informal advisor. Every evening when she comes home from campus, we sit together in my old study, the one with the framed photos of the Voyager spacecraft and the Mars rovers on the walls, and I teach her about orbital mechanics, thermal systems, and the real stories behind the missions that made history at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Watching her eyes light up when she finally understands a concept, seeing her sketch out a trajectory calculation on the whiteboard I installed last year, hearing her ask the kinds of questions I used to ask my own mentors 40 years ago at JPL fills me with a kind of joy I thought I had lost forever. Every month I receive a letter from Lillian. She writes from the California Institution for Women in Corona, where she is serving her 12-year sentence. The letters arrive in plain white envelopes with the prison's return address stamped in the corner. Lillian writes about her regret, about the gambling addiction treatment program she has enrolled in, about the therapy sessions she attends twice a week. She writes that she understands why I have not responded, that she does not expect forgiveness, but that she wants me to know she is trying to become a better person. I keep the letters in a shoebox in the back of my closet. I have not read most of them. Perhaps one day I will. Perhaps one day I will write back. But not today. The wound is still too deep. This morning I woke up at 6:30 the way I have every morning for the past 50 years. I walked downstairs in my slippers and made a pot of coffee, the same dark roast Darius and I buy from the grocery store on South Lake Avenue. Darius came down a few minutes later, already dressed in jeans and a Caltech t-shirt Keisha gave him for Father's Day. I poured him a cup without asking, added no sugar, no cream, exactly the way he likes it. Keisha ran downstairs at 7, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and asked if I could help her with an orbital mechanics problem she was stuck on. We sat together at the kitchen table, the three of us working through the math, while the morning sunlight poured through the window. It felt natural. It felt like home. I think about Margaret often. I think about the 42 years we spent together. The vacations to Yosemite, the quiet Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together, the way she used to hum while she cooked dinner. Losing her in that highway accident was the worst pain I have ever known. It was a pain born of love, of loss, of the natural cruelty of the world. Losing Lillian was different. I lost her not to death, but to betrayal to Jivon, to a choice she made to value money over her own father. That is a pain I am not sure I will ever fully understand or accept, but I have gained something I never expected. I have a family again. Not the family I was born into, not the family I raised, but a family I chose and who chose me in return. This is my true story, and it happened right here in Pasadena, California. If my rideshare driver had not driven past my house that Wednesday night, if Darius Vaughn had not been paying attention, if he had not recognized the danger and acted, I would be dead. That is not an exaggeration. That is a fact confirmed by the Pasadena Police Department, by Detective Sullivan, by the weapons and restraints found on the two men waiting outside my home. So I want to leave you with this: pay attention to the people around you. Notice when something feels wrong. Kindness is not weakness. Listening can save a life. And sometimes a stranger will care about you more than your own family ever did. I am 70 years old. I still volunteer at the VA Medical Center every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, teaching veterans technical skills and listening to their stories. I still live in the house on Cedar Street. I have a family once again. And every morning when I wake up, I am grateful for the night Darius Vaughn drove past my driveway instead of stopping. The night he looked in his rearview mirror and saw two men in dark hoodies standing where no one should have been standing. The night he made a choice that saved my life. That is the end of my story. And to you listening to this story, remember, this blindness does not begin with evil. It begins with comfort. I trusted blood over behavior. I ignored red flags because I wanted to believe my daughter could never be part of something like family betrayal. I was wrong. This is my family story, and I share it so you do not repeat my mistakes. I used to think family meant automatic loyalty. I believed love was permanent simply because it was shared by blood. But family betrayal does not arrive wearing a villain's face. It arrives gently: questions about your finances, sudden concern about your memory, offers to help manage your affairs. Small lies grow quietly until they become something deadly. That is how my family story nearly ended. I stand here today because one man refused to look away. I believe God placed Darius in my path that night. I believe God gave him the courage to act when others stayed silent. And I believe God gave me one more morning to wake up and choose wisdom over denial. 3 times in this journey, I felt his presence: when Darius heard the recordings, when we drove past my house, and when the police said I would not have survived. That was not luck. That was grace. Here is my advice: do not be like me. Do not assume that love protects you from family betrayal. Pay attention when someone pressures you to change legal documents. Pay attention when someone tries to make you doubt your own memory. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Pride almost cost me my life. Silence almost made me a victim. In my view, strength is not stubbornness. Strength is asking for help. Strength is verifying before trusting. Strength is understanding that even a family story can contain chapters of deception. We must protect our dignity, our independence, and our peace. Family is not just blood. Family is who shows up when danger is near. Family is who risks something to protect you. My new family story includes a brave father and a brilliant young woman who calls me Grandpa Mercer. That is redemption. That is grace again. If you see signs of elder abuse or family betrayal, speak up. Call the authorities. Contact Adult Protective Services. Tell someone. Silence protects the wrong people. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, what would you have done differently? Share your thoughts below. If this family story moved, you consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe if you believe stories like this matter. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And one final note. Upcoming stories may include dramatized elements crafted for education and awareness. If that is not your preference, you are free to choose content that better suits you.